Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back. This is Jim Grisanzio from the Oracle Groundbreakers team. I'm here for the 39th and final interview in the interview series for the Oracle Groundbreakers India Yatra. The conference is over, and I'm the laggard here. I have one more interview. The conference actually ended yesterday. And it was a very successful conference, over 100 speakers, and we've done a total of about 45 interviews between Bob, Javed, and myself for this conference, and it's been great fun. And to wrap up the series here, I'm here with Beda Hammerschmidt, who was an engineer on the Oracle database team. And so, Beda, welcome to the program.
Hey, Jim, nice to be here.
It's very nice to meet you. I saved the best for last. Of course, I had to say that, right?
And, honored. Thanks a lot.
But we actually had a lot of interest in people doing interviews. We had to actually turn people away because we just didn't have time to get them all in. We'll have to figure out a better system for next time. And this is characteristic of the India Yatra. The Oracle India community. They're just a very, very enthusiastic group of people, and this is the first time they've heard such a diverse set of speakers, people like yourself. But this is the first time you and I are meeting, actually, and which is intentional on my part. I've reached out to new speakers or people that I haven't known before. So maybe you can start us off. Give us a little bit of a summary of who you are, what you do, and where you are.
Yeah, so my name is Beda, and I work as a coder or developer in the Oracle database group. I started in 2006 as a member of technical staff. That's where everyone started. I finished a Ph.D. in Germany at that time and was looking for an adventure, so I figured, well, why not try out the United States? And I applied there, and it worked out. And I started in the same team that I'm still in. Back then, we did a lot of XML, so the team is XDB, JSON, and text. And yeah, that's normal work as a developer: fixing bugs, creating new features, writing with the doc team. And in about end of 2013, 2014. We were looking into supporting JSON because that's a data model that was gaining a lot of attraction already back then. So we sat down with IBM and figured out how would you best support JSON in a relational database, and we came up with a standard. So we called it SQL JSON back then, and it became part of the SQL 2006 standard. So I was kind of co-author of a standard, which is pretty cool. But at the end, it was interesting with IBM, you had people writing standards and they would pass it on to someone else to implement it. That's not how Oracle works. So we had to get back in our cubicles and code, actually implement what we designed on paper. And so I wrote functions to project JSON into the relational format like JSON table or JSON value. And we got quite a number of customers early on, but we wanted also to change our development philosophy a little bit, where we say, instead of just coding something and then giving it to the customers and hope they're happy, we wanted to have more interactions with customers and users just to make sure we have the right priorities and we're not making operators too complex. So this is when I started out. Writing papers to go to conferences. A lot got rejected initially, but then in the last 3 or 4 years, actually, we got quite a good coverage on various conferences around the world. Yes, and that's kind of a little additional role that I'm having, is to talk about what we do, both on conferences as well as direct interaction with customers if they want to do a POC or have questions how to tune the system. So it's a kind of a little dual role that I'm having right now. And it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah, it definitely is. It is fun to get out there and mix with communities and developers and customers and stuff. A couple of things I actually want to follow up on. What's your PhD in? Because I didn't see that in your bio.
Oh, yeah, it's some boring stuff. It was about, well, actually not. I was probably a little ahead of my time. It was about autonomous indexing of XML data, We actually do this right now in the autonomous database where we automatically find the best indexes to optimize the workload. But back then in the PhD times, it was mostly concept theoretical stuff. But yeah, it got me the job at Oracle.
Well, I got a job at Oracle too without a PhD, so
Sure, but if you want to come from overseas, you have to be special. Otherwise,
right,
they don't admit you in. Yeah, and now I'm working in Germany, so I stayed from 2006 to 2018 in the US, and now I'm doing a bit of family time over in Germany.
cool, cool. Yeah, but they also don't let me access the database gate as well. So, so you also mentioned the IBM standard, working with IBM on that standard you mentioned.
Yes.
How does just you talk a little bit about that? Because I was at Sun and I was involved with some of the standards people in terms of developing
Yes.
standards, and it was a long, long process, like web services standards with IBM and Microsoft and
Yes.
these
Well,
kinds of things.
it is a long process. I was luckily not involved in really writing down the exact standard itself. I could back out once we cleared the concepts. This phase was actually quite interesting. So we met often at these IBM Elmeden Research Center, where I don't know, the hard drive was invented and other cool stuff. And it was mostly whiteboards. It was really playing out different options in our heads. And we really wanted to make it simpler. So the people in the standard were, a lot of them also worked on the XML standard. And XML, as great as it is, was really invented by people who, I used to joke, they're just too smart. Never put two PhDs in one room and let them figure out something. They just want to be brighter than the other. And XML was very, very powerful, but it was also very complex. And what we see with JSON is that it's mostly used by developers who want to advance quickly, like agile development, throw something at the wall, see if it sticks. They don't want to go into like a long design phase where they first have to define their schema, and months later the application can first be started. So it was both XML and JSON are hierarchical data formats, so they share a lot of properties. And also in the Oracle database, there are similar operators. There's XML table, there's JSON table. But we wanted the overall user experience to be much, much simpler so that people can figure it out without having to read a lot of the documentation. And that was a big part of that discussion. We just didn't copy what we did for XML, but we always looked at it 4 or 5 times. What's really needed, what are good defaults, what options should we provide? So that was a fun exercise. And then both IBM and Oracle have people to kind of formulate that as a real standard. It's almost like a mathematical way of writing these operators.
Interesting. Okay, so and JSON is the substance of your talk that you gave at the OGYatra,
Yes.
actually last week. Was
Correct.
it last week or the week before?
I think it was the week before.
Week before. Okay, so it's been a while because it's been a 3-week conference. This has been
Yes,
really
I think it was on the first week. Yes.
on the first week. Okay, yeah, because I was exchanging mail with you to actually set up a time, and we had to go. We had to go away at the end here. So I see JSON support in Oracle DB. What's possible and what makes sense. That's what you spoke about. And
Yes.
so, give me a little bit of a summary of the talk. You've already actually spoken a little bit about JSON here, and also how it went. What was the reaction?
Yeah. So the capabilities or the features to deal with JSON data are pretty powerful in Oracle at the moment. We started in version 12.102, and now we're at version 19 or 20. So there's a lot to cover, and we also had a lot of customers by now, so I could also present how people are using it. So for those who are watching this who are not that familiar with JSON, let me just very briefly explain it. It's basically a data model which does not have a schema. So think of, you want to represent information about a person, in the conventional relational design, you would create a table, and that table has an exact definition of the columns with all the attributes for a person. And that makes it very hard to evolve or to change. Let's say during your development phase, you realize you need an additional property. Let's say you didn't think of a middle name, and now you need a middle name to your first name and last name. So that means you have to go down and change your table. And that is typically quite involved and slows you down. So that's why developers like to use JSON. And that's what we support natively inside the database. And then we have a lot of functionalities to index it or to query it to extract information. So I was giving like the grand tour over these capabilities, kind of a somewhat superficial conceptual look into different features, but then also show how customers make use of it, like what are typical use cases and why do they use it. For example, we have financial customers who have a lot of attributes to a financial product, and it's over 1,000, and it would be very, very wide tables would be needed if to store that relationally, and most of the values would be null. So with JSON, they can pick out of their 1,600 attributes, they can pick exactly the attributes they want for this particular record and not waste space on these null values. And the other thing I also did in this Yatra talk was to demo our interface on top of the JSON support. So that interface, we call it Simple Oracle Document Access, or SODA. And that basically makes your Oracle database look like a document database, like a MongoDB, for example. And that was very well perceived. There were a lot of questions around that. I think my perception on the questions or on the community in general was that they really wanted to know the details. They were very technical, and they also connected the dots between what I said. So they really liked this aspect of using the Oracle database as a document store, while at the same time being able to query it using a JSON table, for example. So that was quite interesting to see, like, an audience that is that engaged.
Yeah, they are. They are very engaged. I think every single presentation, every single speaker I've spoken to has said that they've had many, many questions, after their talk. Sometimes as many as 40, and sometimes that these.
Yeah, I think I got into that range. Yes.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, and also the question answer sort of dialogue continues after the talk
Yes.
on email and Slack and things like that. You just continue on, which
and,
is
and
really,
that's
really
actually
great.
exactly what I want. So I want that engagement. I want people to say, hey, this feature is great and that really sucks, or why didn't you do this, or I need that, because that enables us to just make the right choices when developing a feature. There's a lot of work involved. If you have an idea or you code it, it needs to be tested, documented. So if we build something that nobody wants, it's really a huge waste of resources. Right. So
have you presented to the India Yatra community?
No, this was my first time. I've actually never been to India. I have friends who I got to know in the US and who moved back, and still on my bucket list to visit them. But no, this was my first time to present to India. I mean, I do customers in India that I spoke to on a smaller, or with smaller people involved, but from a conference point, this was my first and only India-based conference.
Well, that's really great to hear, because that's such a benefit to them to be able to hear this content from you, and it's great because you got to experience them as well. If you go there live, it's a similar experience in terms of the interest and the questions and just the level of technical ability. These are non-trivial people. It really is. They really are very, very smart, but they hold these long conferences. They go well into the evening, and this is a very, very, and they don't even think it's intense or anything like that. They just do it, and I'm like exhausted trying to keep up with these guys. It's really, I mean, I've been to Indy many, many times, and it's always an experience. So yeah, if you have a chance to go after we're let out, please do.
Oh, definitely.
Take the opportunity,
definitely.
and. So I'm kind of interested here a little bit. I mean, um, it. How many people were familiar with the JSON support in the database? Did this come? I mean, is this just well known and just not utilized? Are developers? Because it sounds like it's a ready-made platform for developers.
I think I didn't make a poll, so I cannot give you like an exact percentage. So it's a guess. I think by now, uh, a lot, probably the majority of Oracle DBAs and people who use Oracle intensively know about JSON. So I can't make a specific statement to India, but that's my overall impression. That doesn't mean that they know the entirety of what we support. And it doesn't mean that they know what problems ideally to solve with it. I mean, a lot of NoSQL database vendors went out and said JSON will solve all problems, including world hunger. But often it's not the right thing to do, right? And part of what I try to do is not only to kind of educate or sell what we build, but also to put it in the context. Where does it really make sense? So my personal goal is really to help Oracle users to build the best product or to make the best use of Oracle. And there have been cases where people came and said, oh, someone told me to do this with JSON. And I just told them, well, you may gain a little bit here, but you actually pay a huge price for that. Why don't you optimize your relational storage in that way? And that's fine too. So JSON, I think we got a good understanding of what it is. But with that SODA API that I mentioned a few minutes before, that's just starting to be known. So people learn about it on these conferences, and they really see the potential of combining the benefits of a SQL access and a NoSQL document style access to the very same data, which means that some developer who wants to use such interface to the database can do that, while at the same time you can still run your analytical queries or your reports on the very same data. You don't have to like load it from one database to another and then work with stale data.
All right, excellent. All right, this sounds really exciting. I'm really happy to hear this. So what's it like now? I mean, when you go out to conferences, you've been to various Oracle conferences and engineering conferences, and you're obviously interacting at a very, very high level from an engineering perspective. And now, obviously, we have obviously everything is virtual now. How do you experience now versus when you actually went out to events?
Well, I had to realize that my lifestyle, which I thought was normal, is what other people call quarantine. So I'm doing home office. Nothing much has changed for me. I used to go on a lot of conferences, maybe one a month, speak to customers or go on conferences, user groups, etc. I always liked the experience being there, but typically there was a big cost of getting there. Like the one example was last year I went to a conference in Croatia, like a beautiful location. It was on an island, very nice, extremely nice, but getting there was really tough. I had to fly into Italy, rent a car, drive through Hungary to Croatia. So it took me like a day to get there and a day to get back. So that really cuts my productivity. I mean, I had a very great reception there, and the paper or the presentation, it was definitely worth it, but it comes at a huge cost. And what I see is with going online is that it just lowers the to give a talk. There's obviously big conferences, but there are also customer events. So you may speak to a customer who just considers it or just wants to do a POC, and that would be very expensive to fly to a customer and have a 30-minute discussion. And these days, it's very easy. The people in the field call me, hey, can you join this call? And I'm just joining in for 45 minutes, provide the information that's needed, or we schedule follow-up calls. And that's really a huge productivity boost. So that part is all positive. I think the social aspect is lacking. So if you go to a conference, it's not only listening to presentations and giving your presentation, it's also about the events that happen, for example, in the evening where you hang out with people And then you chat on it on a different level, and you may realize, hey, what you're doing and what I'm doing, actually, that makes sense. It didn't look like it made sense, but it actually did. And nobody joined each other's conferences because it felt so remote. But great things can come out of that. And I cannot imagine really how such ad hoc interactions could happen over Zoom or over online conferences, because it's these presentations, they have a start and an end, and then you don't speak to people that didn't attend it. So I think we need a combination in the future, right, where people still meet up, socially engage, and do all that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And by the way, the answer that you gave just is very consistent with what most people are saying now. There's advantages and disadvantages. And I think, when the physical events start up again, as they inevitably will, the digital, technology, the digital way of doing this will have advanced, because right now it's pretty rudimentary, even though it's advanced by just a few years ago standards, but it'll be much more sophisticated, so we can do a combination of both, relatively easily. Yeah. And because I agree, I mean, I've been to many, many events, and I've run many events for 20 years, and when you're on a conference, having good speakers and having good sessions is just one aspect to it. There are many, many other aspects to it that are just as valuable, not only for the speakers, but the attendees as well. So, all right, cool stuff. All right, Beda, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your time. And I did indeed save the best for last. And
thanks, I feel honored. Thank you.
So, cool. And, we haven't actually met before live, so I really look forward to sometime meeting you either in Germany or in the United States, or maybe even in Yatra, which, Cy was planning a 12-city tour, for this year, 12 cities. It was last year.
Book me. That's great. I like to travel the world.
Last year it was 10 cities. I attended 6 of them. It was very difficult, but because sometimes, depending on the schedule, you might get up at at 6 o'clock in the morning and travel, and then you have to present, and you stay late at night, and so there's a few days in the schedule where it's essentially all day, all night, but then you have the weekend, and you get to experience a little bit of India, and just fantastic experience.
Would be very great.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll do it next year. So,
good. Yeah.
Until then, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.